Imagine pouring your heart and soul into saving your family's legacy, only to have it ripped away at the very last moment, betrayed by the people you trusted most. What would you do? In today's story, Evelyn faces the fight of her life to reclaim not just a business, but the heart of her family and community. What she uncovers will shock you, and her next move will leave everyone speechless. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. Evelyn's car rolled to a stop in front of the Mountain Ridge Inn, its once pristine facade now faded and chipped. She sat still for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel as the crisp autumn air pressed against the windshield. The sight before her was both heartbreakingly familiar and achingly foreign. Nestled among the fiery hues of Vermont's fall foliage, the inn had once been a beacon of charm and warmth, a sanctuary for guests and family alike. Now it stood as a weary relic, its charm diminished, its spirit flickering. From the back seat, her daughter Grace leaned forward, pressing her face to the glass. "This is it?" she asked, her voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and mild disappointment. "Yes," Evelyn said softly, her tone steady but burdened. "This is it." As she stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel underfoot sent a jolt through her, an involuntary trigger of memories she hadn't allowed herself to visit in years. She saw flashes of herself as a young girl running through the gardens, her grandfather calling out with a hearty laugh, and her grandmother waving guests goodbye from the porch. The vision of that vibrant past clashed cruelly with the reality before her. Cracked shutters, weeds sprawling across the once immaculate gardens, and a sagging porch railing that seemed to mirror her family's fractured bond. Evelyn hesitated at the front door, her fingers brushing against the worn brass handle, its chill seeping into her skin. She lingered there, staring at the peeling paint before finally pushing the door open. The creak of the hinges reverberated through the empty lobby, a ghostly echo of its former life. Inside, the air was thick and stale, carrying a faint mustiness that spoke of abandonment. Her heels clicked softly against the scuffed wooden floors as she stepped inside. The lobby, once the heart of the inn, felt lifeless. The chandelier still hung above, but several bulbs had gone out, casting uneven, sullen light across the room. The plush armchairs that had once invited guests to linger were now threadbare, their cushions sunken. The check-in counter, where her grandfather had once stood with pride, was cluttered with outdated brochures and layered in dust. Evelyn felt the weight of it all, pressing down on her chest like a physical force. "Mom, are you okay?" Grace's voice broke through the heavy silence, pulling Evelyn out of her thoughts. She nodded, though her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm fine, just memories." But she wasn't fine. The memories weren't comforting, they were a cruel juxtaposition to the present. In Chicago, she had built a reputation as a top-tier business consultant, a career forged from relentless ambition and countless sacrifices. Yet one late-night phone call had unraveled everything. The memory hit her like a wave. She had been in her sleek modern office overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline when her mother's trembling voice broke through. "Evelyn, we're losing the inn. Your father's health. Colton's trying, but he can't handle it alone." Her stomach churned as she recalled how those words had landed like a punch. She had stared out at the city lights, their brightness mocking her internal turmoil. The inn wasn't just a building. It was her grandparents' legacy, a cornerstone of her childhood, and a symbol of a family unity that had since crumbled. She had fought so hard to build her own life, but now she was being asked to return to a place she had spent years trying to escape. Resigned, she had made the impossible choice. She sold her condo, left her career behind, and packed her life into boxes, returning to a home that no longer felt like one. Her reverie was broken by a familiar voice dripping with casual arrogance. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." Evelyn turned sharply to see Colton leaning against the check-in counter, his signature smug grin firmly in place. He hadn't changed, relaxed to the point of carelessness, his confidence teetering on the edge of arrogance. "I didn't realize I was running late," Evelyn replied coolly, masking the irritation bubbling inside her. Colton shrugged theatrically. "We've been holding down the fort without you," he said, gesturing around the neglected lobby, "but I guess it's good you're here now." Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the room, her frustration mounting. "Holding down the fort, is that what you call this?" She gestured pointedly at the state of the inn. "What exactly have you been doing, Colton?" His grin faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly, Look, I've been named interim manager. Mom and Dad thought it made sense since I've been here. They decided that without even consulting me. Evelyn's voice rose, her disbelief palpable. Colton shrugged again, his casual demeanor only fueling her anger. You've been gone for over a decade. What did you expect? Evelyn clenched her jaw, biting back the retort that hovered on the tip of her tongue. She didn't want to escalate this, at least not yet. Fine, she said curtly, her tone edged with steel. But if I'm going to help, we're doing this my way. Colton's grin turned mocking. Sure, whatever you say, boss. Evelyn's gaze shifted to the counter where a stack of disorganized folders caught her eye. She picked them up and flipped through the contents. Spreadsheets, invoices, guest records, all incomplete and in disarray. Her stomach sank as the numbers painted a grim picture. The inn wasn't just struggling, it was hemorrhaging money. She turned to Colton, her tone sharp. We need to talk about this. Later, he said dismissively, already turning away. I've got things to do. Evelyn watched him saunter off, her frustration boiling over. But she knew this wasn't the time for a confrontation. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. If no one else was going to fix this, she would do it herself, piece by painstaking piece. That evening, Evelyn sat alone in the manager's office, poring over the inn's financial records. The deeper she delved, the more troubling the numbers became. Unexplained expenses, irregular withdrawals, nothing made sense. Her instincts, honed from years of analyzing businesses, screamed that something was wrong. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Grace peeked into the room, her concern evident. Mom, are you okay? Evelyn forced a smile, though her heart felt heavy. I will be, she said softly. It's going to take a lot of work, but we'll turn this place around. Grace stepped closer, her expression earnest. I know you can do it. As Grace left, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her resolve hardening. She had sacrificed too much to let this fail. The Mountain Ridge Inn wasn't just a building. It was her family's legacy, and no matter the cost, she would save it. Evelyn ran her fingers over the dusty edges of the photograph she had found in the inn's cluttered office. The picture was from decades ago. Her parents stood proudly in front of the Mountain Ridge Inn, their faces beaming with optimism. A younger Evelyn clutched a ribbon her father had handed her, her smile as bright as the Vermont sun shining down on the freshly painted inn. Beside her, Colton grinned mischievously at the camera, his shirt untucked and hair slightly askew. The sight stirred a bittersweet ache in her chest, a wave of nostalgia crashing against the sharp rocks of resentment. She tucked the photo into her pocket and glanced around the office. Dust blanketed the surfaces, and cobwebs stretched between forgotten knickknacks. The vibrant inn of her memories, bustling with guests and laughter, had faded into this neglected shell. Evelyn inhaled deeply, the musty air mingling with the weight of her thoughts, and stepped out into the hallway. The walls were still adorned with the same faded wallpaper she remembered from her childhood, the edges curling like old parchment. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet echoed with the past, her grandparents' voices calling her and Colton to help with chores, their laughter mingling with the chatter of guests. Those sounds were long gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that mirrored the state of her family. In the main lobby, Evelyn found Grace chatting animatedly with Diane, the inn's longtime housekeeper. Diane had been more than just a staff member. She had been a surrogate aunt, a constant presence during Evelyn's childhood, filling the gaps when her parents were too busy managing the inn. Mom, did you know Diane used to be a ski champion? Grace's eyes sparkled with wonder as she spoke. Evelyn managed a small smile, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Diane's stories were a welcome distraction for Grace, but Evelyn couldn't shake the heaviness pressing on her chest. She excused herself with a nod to Diane and headed toward the West Wing, the section Colton had claimed as his makeshift office. The door was slightly ajar. Evelyn froze as she heard voices inside. I'm telling you, we don't need her meddling, Colton said sharply, his tone tinged with frustration. She doesn't understand how things work here anymore. Selling that land for development is the only way to save this place. Her mother's voice followed, soft but firm. Colton, just give her time. She'll come around when she sees it's the best decision. Evelyn's heart sank. She felt the blood drain from her face, replaced by a searing wave of anger and hurt. They hadn't just made decisions behind her back. They were conspiring to ease her into accepting them, as though her voice didn't matter. as though she was a guest in her own family. Unable to stay silent, Evelyn pushed the door open. Her brother, mother, and father turned to her startled. "Selling part of the inn?" Evelyn's voice trembled, but her gaze was sharp. "Without telling me?" Colton leaned back in his chair, his signature smirk firmly in place. "Well, you've been gone for years, Evelyn. Someone had to step up." Evelyn's father shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. "Colton's been handling things, Evelyn. We trust his judgment." Evelyn's laugh was bitter, a sharp sound that seemed to cut through the tension in the room. "His judgment? Look around you. This place is falling apart under his watch, and now you want to carve it up like it's a piece of meat? This inn is more than a business. It's our family's legacy." Colton's smirk faded, replaced by a scowl. "Oh, spare me the lecture, Evelyn. You walked away from all of this. Don't come back here acting like you care more than the rest of us." Evelyn's hands balled into fists. "I left because I had no choice. Do you have any idea what I gave up to keep this family afloat? What have you done, Colton, besides run this place into the ground?" Colton shot to his feet, his voice rising with anger. "You think you're some kind of hero? All you've ever done is talk big and swoop in when it's convenient for you. You don't know the first thing about what it takes to run this place day in and day out. Convenient?" Evelyn's voice cracked with fury. "I left my career, my home, everything, because this place mattered to me, to us. But clearly, I was wrong." Their mother stepped between them, her voice strained but commanding. "Enough, both of you. This isn't helping." Evelyn's eyes burned, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She turned to her mother, her voice low but trembling. "How could you do this? How could you make these decisions without even talking to me?" Her mother's face faltered, guilt flashing across her features. We thought it would be easier for you. You've already sacrificed so much." The words, meant as comfort, felt like salt in an open wound. "You didn't trust me enough to be part of this," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "You chose Colton. You always do." Without waiting for a response, she stormed out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. The betrayal stung deeply, not just from Colton, but from her parents as well. She had given everything to this family, and this was how they repaid her. In the dining area, Diane was overseeing the setup for dinner. Evelyn approached, her expression resolute despite the storm raging inside her. Grace ran over, sensing her mother's distress. "Mom, are you okay?" Evelyn forced a smile for Grace's sake, her voice firm but calm. "I will be," she said, turning to Diane. "We've got work to do." Diane tilted her head, concern evident in her eyes. "What kind of work?" Evelyn straightened her spine, her determination unshakable. "We're going to save this inn, with or without my family's help." As Diane nodded and began organizing the staff, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope reignite within her. This wasn't just about preserving a building. It was about proving to herself and everyone else that she wouldn't back down. She had fought too hard and given too much to let this legacy crumble. Not now, not ever. Rewritten. Chapter 3. The Community's Divide. The town hall buzzed with anticipation, its walls reverberating with the hum of hushed debates. Rows of folding chairs were packed with townsfolk, their faces a mixture of curiosity, concern, and quiet frustration. Evelyn sat near the front, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if physically holding herself together against the storm she knew was brewing. Beside her, Colton lounged in his seat, his confident smirk sending fresh waves of irritation through her. He looked as if he already knew the outcome, and the smugness in his posture only fueled her determination. The mayor, a man caught precariously between tradition and progress, opened the meeting with a stiff introduction. His voice carried the weariness of someone who had spent weeks fielding calls and complaints. "Tonight, we're here to discuss the future of Mountain Ridge Inn and the implications for our community," he announced. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implications. Evelyn stood first, her heels clicking softly against the worn wood of the stage as she approached the podium. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. "Mountain Ridge Inn has stood as a cornerstone of this community for decades," she began, her voice firm yet imbued with emotion. "It's not just a business, it's a legacy, a symbol of the unity and traditions that make our town special." She clicked a button, and the projector behind her displayed images of the inn during its heyday. Families laughing in the lobby, couples dancing under string lights, and community events that had brought people together for generations. "This is what we're fighting for," she said, her tone resolute. "Sustainable tourism, partnerships with local businesses, and a return to the values that have always defined Mountain Ridge. With the right strategy, We can revitalize the inn without sacrificing our identity. A few nods rippled through the crowd, but they were quickly drowned out by murmurs of doubt and skepticism. Evelyn scanned the room, catching glimpses of people exchanging unsure glances. The weight of their hesitation pressed against her resolve. Colton rose next, his gait casual but deliberate. Adjusting his tie, he stepped to the podium with the calculated ease of someone who had prepared for this moment. "While my sister makes a good emotional appeal," he started, his tone condescending, "we need to face reality. Mountain Ridge Inn is hemorrhaging money. Nostalgia won't pay the bills." He clicked the projector remote, and glossy renderings of a sleek commercial plaza appeared on the screen. Gasps echoed through the room as the townsfolk took in the image of modern storefronts and neatly landscaped parking lots superimposed over the inn's grounds. Selling part of the land for development isn't just an option. It's the only viable path forward, Colton continued. This project will bring jobs, infrastructure, and much-needed money to our town. The room erupted into chatter, divided between those who valued progress and those clinging to tradition. An elderly man in the back stood, his voice quivering. "You can't just erase our history for a quick buck, Colton. That inn has been the heart of this town for generations." Another voice shot back from the middle row. "And what about our future? My kids need jobs, not memories." Evelyn clenched her fists, rising to her feet. "You can't just sell our family's legacy for a quick profit, Colton," she snapped, her voice cutting through the noise. "This inn is more than numbers on a spreadsheet. It's our history, our identity." Colton turned to her, his smirk widening as if he had been waiting for her outburst. "And what has this history brought us, Evelyn? Bankruptcy? Empty rooms? You're clinging to the past while I'm offering a future." Before Evelyn could retort, the mayor raised his hands, calling for order. But the room dissolved into chaos, with heated debates breaking out among the attendees. Evelyn's heart sank as she overheard voices supporting Colton's proposal, swayed by his promises of financial stability. She knew this battle would be harder than she anticipated. Back at the inn that evening, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, the financial reports spread across her lap, blurring as exhaustion and despair threatened to overwhelm her. Grace entered quietly, her face a mix of hesitation and determination. "Mom," Grace began softly, sitting beside her, "I believe in you. We can't let him ruin this." Evelyn forced a smile, though her heart felt heavy. "It's not just about me, Grace," she said, her voice wavering. "It's about everyone who's ever stepped foot in that inn, everyone who's made memories there." Grace nodded, her eyes bright with an idea. "Then let's show them. Let's host a fundraiser, something that reminds people of why this place matters. Pictures, stories, music, everything that makes the inn special." The suggestion sparked a flicker of hope in Evelyn. "A fundraiser," she repeated, her lips curving into a faint smile. "That might just work." The following week, the inn buzzed with activity as preparations for the fundraiser unfolded. Grace took charge of rallying younger residents, her enthusiasm infectious. She visited local cafes and hangouts, persuading her peers to join the effort. "This isn't just about saving an old building," she told them passionately. "It's about preserving a place where we've all shared memories, where our stories began." Her words resonated, and soon the younger generation of the town joined in, helping to design flyers and brainstorm event ideas. The lobby transformed into a gallery of old photographs, showcasing the inn's golden days. Lanterns and string lights adorned the garden, casting a warm glow as the finishing touches were put into place. The night of the fundraiser, the inn was alive with chatter and laughter. Guests arrived in steady streams, their curiosity and nostalgia mingling in the air. Evelyn stood at the entrance, greeting each person with a mix of gratitude and nervous anticipation. As the evening progressed, Evelyn took the stage, her heart pounding. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion bubbling underneath. "This inn is more than a building. It's where stories begin, where traditions thrive, and where our community finds its heart." Applause rippled through the crowd, but the moment was interrupted as Colton, flanked by his investor, made his entrance. The investor, sharp-suited with an air of impatience, scanned the event with thinly veiled disdain. "Colton!" Evelyn called out, her voice carrying across the room. "Why don't you tell everyone your plans for this inn? Let them hear what you're willing to sacrifice." Colton hesitated, clearly unprepared for the public challenge. "I'm only doing what's best for the town," he replied, his charm faltering. "Then why does it feel like you're doing what's best for yourself?" Evelyn countered, her gaze unwavering. Her words hung in the air and the crowd murmured. Grace, emboldened by the moment, stepped forward. This inn isn't just history, it's our future too. We don't need to destroy it to move forward. We can grow by building on what makes us unique. The crowd's mood shifted, their hesitation giving way to understanding. By the end of the night, several townsfolk approached Evelyn, pledging their support. But Evelyn knew the fight wasn't over. The investors' whispered words to Colton as they left hinted at growing impatience. The stakes were rising, but for the first time in days, Evelyn felt a sliver of hope. The basement of the Mountain Ridge Inn was cloaked in shadows, the dim light of Evelyn's flashlight casting long, flickering beams against the cluttered walls. It smelled of mildew and aged wood, a mixture of neglect and nostalgia that stirred an ache deep in her chest. She stepped carefully, brushing aside cobwebs and avoiding precarious stacks of old furniture and forgotten relics. Each creak of the floorboards underfoot seemed to echo with the whispers of her childhood. Her light landed on a locked filing cabinet tucked in the far corner, nearly buried under boxes of outdated brochures and brittle guest ledgers. A faint memory surfaced of her grandmother meticulously organizing documents in this very spot, her soft voice guiding Evelyn as she filed papers. Evelyn knelt down, brushing a thick layer of dust from the cabinet's surface. The sight of it stirred an unexpected swell of emotion, a bittersweet reminder of the order and care her grandparents had instilled in every corner of the inn. With determined hands, she fetched a screwdriver from a nearby tool chest. The lock, rusted with age, gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, rows of neatly stacked folders greeted her, their edges yellowed and brittle. Evelyn's heart raced as she sifted through the papers, her fingers trembling slightly. Among tax records and receipts, her eyes fell on a legal deed signed in her grandparents' careful handwriting. Her breath caught as she read through it, the words leaping off the page. It outlined restrictions on the land's use, a clause stipulating that the inn could not be sold or repurposed without unanimous family approval, and that its original mission as a community hub must always be upheld. Evelyn sat back on her heels, the weight of the discovery settling over her. Her flashlight illuminated the handwriting, bringing back the sound of her grandfather's voice. Evelyn, this inn isn't just a business, it's a promise, a place where people can find a little magic, a little home. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory steady her resolve. If this clause held up, it could change everything. Later that afternoon, Evelyn drove into town, her mind racing. She parked in front of the local historical society, a modest building that housed years of the town's archives. Inside, she found Martin, an old family friend, and the society's resident historian. He greeted her with a warm smile. "Evelyn, it's been too long," Martin said, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "What brings you here?" Evelyn placed the deed on the table between them. "I need your help, Martin. This could be the key to saving the inn." Together, they pored over the document and other records she had brought. Martin adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowing as he examined the language. "Your grandparents were meticulous," he said, nodding in approval. "This clause is solid, but the wording is dated. You'll need legal support to make it enforceable." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice urgent. "What happens if this goes public? Could it stop the investor?" Martin stroked his chin thoughtfully. "If this clause is legally binding, it could force the deal into limbo. Investors like that thrive on smooth transactions. Bad press and legal complications might scare them off entirely." Hope flickered in Evelyn's chest, but it was quickly tempered by the realization of what lay ahead. If Colton discovered what she had found, he wouldn't hesitate to fight back. Her suspicions were confirmed that evening. Evelyn stepped into the inn's lobby, her heart sinking as she saw Colton waiting for her. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression thunderous. "You've been digging," he accused, his voice low and sharp. Evelyn met his glare head on. "I had to," she shot back, her tone steady. "Do you even know what you're signing? This deal is a betrayal of everything this inn stands for." Colton scoffed, his composure cracking. "You think you're the only one who cares about this place? At least I'm doing something to save it instead of clinging to some sentimental fantasy." "Sentimental?" Evelyn's voice rose, her frustration spilling over. "Grandma and Grandpa built this inn for the community, not for profit. Selling off the land isn't saving anything, it's erasing their legacy." Colton took a step closer, his voice dripping with venom. "You always think you know best, don't you? Maybe if you hadn't abandoned us, you'd actually understand what it takes to run this place." The words cut deep, and for a moment Evelyn faltered. But then her anger surged, hot and unyielding. I left because I had to. Do you think I wanted to? I gave up my career, my home, everything because this place matters to me. To us. Convenient excuse, Colton spat. You walked away, Evelyn. You don't get to swoop in now and act like the hero. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low but fierce. You're destroying everything they work for, Colton. And you know what? I found something that might stop you. She pulled the deed from her bag, holding it up. There's a clause in this document that could void your entire deal. I'll take it to the council if I have to. Colton's confidence wavered, but only for a moment. He quickly masked it with a sneer. You wouldn't dare. Watch me, Evelyn replied, her voice cold and steady. The town council meeting the following week was packed. Evelyn stood at the podium, the deed clutched in her hands. She presented the clause, her voice clear and impassioned as she outlined its implications. The room buzzed with murmurs as townsfolk exchanged surprised looks. This isn't just about saving the inn, Evelyn said, her gaze sweeping across the room. It's about preserving what this place has meant to our town for generations. We can find a way to keep it thriving without tearing apart its foundation. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Harold, one of the older councilmen, spoke up. We'll need time to review this, but if the clause holds up, Colton's deal could face significant delays. From the back of the room, Evelyn caught sight of Colton, his jaw tight and his eyes blazing. She knew this victory was only temporary, but it was enough to rally support. A few key community members approached her after the meeting, pledging their assistance. Grace, who had watched the proceedings quietly, looked at her mother with newfound admiration. As Evelyn left the meeting, her phone buzzed with a text from Martin. Attached was a scanned email he had uncovered, correspondence between Colton's investor and a third party, hinting at plans to resell the land for a massive profit. Evelyn stared at the screen, her blood boiling. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a calculated betrayal. She clenched her fists, the weight of the battle ahead pressing heavily on her chest. If she was going to save the inn, she couldn't rely on the council or her family. She would have to outsmart them all. Evelyn sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter. The sharp, precise words etched on the page seemed to loom larger with every line she read. If the sale of the land is not completed as scheduled, we will initiate legal action against Mountain Ridge Inn and all associated parties. Additionally, we reserve the right to disclose non-compliance to relevant financial institutions and industry networks. The investor's threat wasn't just a lawsuit. It was an open declaration of war. Her chest tightened, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't merely a battle for the inn. It was a fight for her family's name and reputation. The desk around her, piled high with financial records, faded photographs, and discarded coffee mugs, felt like an island of chaos reflecting the storm inside her. She clenched her fists, the familiar determination battling the creeping tendrils of doubt. Through the window, the quiet rhythm of the small town continued unabated. Evelyn stared at the familiar sight, feeling the cruel irony. The town she was trying to protect seemed blissfully unaware of the catastrophe looming over its heart. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Grace peeked in, her eyes scanning her mother's weary expression. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked, stepping closer. Evelyn exhaled deeply, folding the letter and placing it on the desk. "The investor isn't bluffing anymore. If we don't agree to sell, they'll sue us. They're even threatening to damage the inn's reputation." Grace's brows furrowed, her youthful determination flaring to life. "They're just bullies, Mom. They think you'll cave if they scare you enough." Evelyn tried to summon a reassuring smile but failed. "This is more than just intimidation, Grace. They have resources, connections, and power. If they follow through, we could lose everything. Our savings, the inn, even the chance to rebuild." Grace stepped forward, her hand resting gently on her mother's. "Then we fight smarter," she said, her voice steady. "There's always a way out, we just have to find it." Her words lit a small spark in Evelyn's chest. She nodded slowly. "You're right. We can't let them win." Together they began combing through the pile of documents scattered across Evelyn's desk. Grace read aloud sections of contracts and proposals, her fresh perspective catching details Evelyn had missed in her exhaustion. Hours passed, but their efforts finally bore fruit. "Mom, look at this!" Grace pointed to a section of the investor's development plans. "They're proposing a high-end resort, but the construction site overlaps with part of the town's protected wetland zone." Evelyn's eyes widened as she read the clause. The investor had buried their intentions under promises of economic growth. But this revelation exposed the truth. If this gets out, it could ruin them, Evelyn murmured. Not just legally, but in the court of public opinion. Grace grinned. Exactly, so let's make sure everyone knows. Evelyn squeezed her daughter's hand, gratitude swelling in her chest. Grace, you've just given us our first real advantage. Later that evening, Evelyn paced the dining room of the inn, the tension building as the family gathered for a meeting. Her father sat at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on the wood grain as if avoiding what was to come. Her mother sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Across the table, Colton lounged in his chair, exuding a false confidence that only fueled Evelyn's frustration. Well, Colton said, breaking the silence. Let's hear it, Evelyn. What's your grand plan to save us this time? Evelyn placed the investor's letter on the table, her tone sharp. This is what you've brought to our doorstep, Colton. They're threatening to sue us and destroy everything we've worked for. Colton smirked, leaning back in his chair. They're just playing hardball. It's business. You wouldn't understand. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. Don't patronize me, Colton. This isn't just business, it's blackmail. They're threatening to ruin the inn's reputation, and you're letting them. You're overreacting, Colton said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. We can't keep clinging to the past, Evelyn. This place is a money pit. The investor's offer is the only way forward. Evelyn's voice rose, her frustration boiling over. Forward to what? Destroying the town's ecosystem? Turning this inn into a soulless resort? Have you even read their full proposal, or are you just taking their promises at face value? Colton stiffened, his smirk faltering. You think you're better than me because you left? Because you built a career? You don't know what it's like to stay here and watch everything fall apart. Evelyn's eyes burned with unshed tears. I left to build a life for myself, but I came back because I care. I sacrificed everything to save this place, and all you've done is sell out. Enough, their father interjected, his voice weary but firm. This arguing gets us nowhere. Evelyn turned to her parents, her voice trembling with emotion. You don't see what's happening, do you? He's not saving the inn. He's dismantling it piece by piece, and you're letting him. Her mother's voice was soft but resolute. Colton is doing what he thinks is best for the family. And I'm not? Evelyn shot back, her voice breaking. I've fought for this place while everyone else has given up. How can you side with him after everything I've done? The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, her father spoke, his tone tinged with regret. Maybe we've been too quick to trust the investor's promises. If you have another plan, Evelyn, we'll listen. Her mother nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. We don't want to lose the inn, Evelyn. If there's a chance to save it, we'll support you. The words felt like a lifeline, but Evelyn knew the road ahead would be treacherous. She looked at Colton, his jaw tight with anger, and knew he wasn't ready to let go of his alliance with the investor. As the meeting ended, Evelyn returned to her desk, Grace trailing behind her. Mom, Grace said softly, you were amazing in there. Evelyn smiled, pulling her daughter into a hug. I couldn't have done it without you, but this is just the beginning. Together they began drafting their next move, determination burning in their hearts. The fight for the inn and their family's legacy was far from over. The town hall was filled to capacity, the air thick with anticipation and tension. Faces both familiar and wary turned toward the front of the room, where Evelyn stood, her palms flat against the oak podium. Behind her, a projector illuminated images of Mountain Ridge Inn in its heyday, bustling hallways, couples smiling on the porch, and her grandparents standing proudly beneath the freshly painted sign. Each photo was a reminder of the inn's deep roots in the town's history. Mountain Ridge Inn isn't just a business, Evelyn began, her voice steady but layered with emotion. It's part of this town's soul, a legacy built not just for my family, but for all of you. Selling it to an outsider won't just change its ownership, it will erase its history. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn scanned the room, locking eyes with Mr. Holden, a widower who had celebrated every anniversary with his late wife at the inn. Next to him sat Sarah, a longtime housekeeper who had spent decades tending to the inn's rooms. These were the people she was fighting for, the people who saw the inn as a second home. Before Evelyn could continue, the sharp creak of the double doors interrupted her. Heads turned toward the back of the room as a man in a tailored gray suit entered, his briefcase in one hand and a smirk on his lips. Mark Denham, the investor's representative, moved with the air of someone used to commanding attention and control. He strode confidently to the front, positioning himself next to Evelyn with a practiced, polite smile. Good evening, Mark began, his voice polished and commanding. My name is Mark Denham, representing Riverside Development. We are the prospective buyers of this intriguing property. Evelyn's jaw tightened as Mark scanned the room, his gaze sweeping over the gathered townsfolk. Riverside Development has a vision, he continued, his voice oozing confidence. A vision for progress, for jobs, for a brighter future for this town. I understand Miss Evelyn Anderson has her concerns, but we can't let sentimentality hinder opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Evelyn interjected, her voice cutting through the murmurs. An opportunity to strip this town of its identity? To bulldoze our history and replace it with a soulless corporate plaza? Mark's smile tightened, but he didn't falter. Miss Anderson, I assure you, this project will generate jobs, increase tourism, and provide economic stability. Isn't that what this town needs? Evelyn turned to the audience, flipping to the next slide in her presentation. A schematic of the proposed development appeared on the screen, showing a sprawling entertainment complex that engulfed the inn's grounds. The words "Commercial Plaza" loomed ominously across the top. Gasps echoed through the hall. This isn't modernization, Evelyn said, her voice rising. This is destruction. This is demolishing the Mountain Ridge Inn and replacing it with something that will drain our town of its charm and resources. Is that what you want? Mark's expression darkened. He stepped forward, his voice cold and sharp. Miss Anderson is misleading you. This project represents growth and opportunity. Without it, this town will stagnate. And let me make one thing clear. If the sale doesn't go through, Riverside Development is prepared to take legal action. We'll also explore other options for the land, including commercial zoning adjustments that could result in less appealing alternative. His words landed like a bomb. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of his threat pressing down on everyone. For a moment, Evelyn's confidence wavered. What if she lost? What if... I have something to say. Grace's voice rang out, clear and determined. Every head turned toward her, and Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. Grace rose from her seat in the front row and walked to the podium, her steps hesitant but purposeful. Evelyn stepped aside, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and trepidation. Grace's hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the podium, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. I know I'm younger than most of you here, Grace began, her tone humble but earnest. But I've spent the last few weeks exploring the inn, listening to stories about what it means to this town. Every room holds a memory. Every wall has a story. You can't replace that with glass towers and neon signs. Her words hung in the air, touching something deep in the townsfolk. Even those who had seemed skeptical earlier now leaned forward, captivated by her sincerity. And as for jobs and tourism, Grace continued, her voice gaining strength, why can't we focus on what makes this town special? The inn could host community events, partner with local farms and artisans, and create something that benefits everyone, not just an investor who doesn't care about us. Her passion ignited a wave of applause, and Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She placed a hand on Grace's shoulder as her daughter stepped back, giving her a look of unspoken gratitude. Mark attempted to regain control, issuing more veiled threats about economic stagnation, but the tide had turned. Evelyn seized the moment, presenting her alternative plan: sustainable tourism, partnerships with local businesses, and events that celebrated the town's heritage. The room buzzed with renewed energy. By the end of the night, the townsfolk voted overwhelmingly to back Evelyn's vision. As the crowd dispersed, many approached her with words of encouragement and offers of support. Mark left in a huff, his confident stride now stiff with irritation. Back at the inn, Evelyn stood by the window watching the town hall lights flicker off. The victory felt bittersweet. Colton hadn't attended the meeting, and his absence spoke louder than words. Grace joined her, leaning against the window frame. You did it, Mom, she said softly. Evelyn smiled, pulling her daughter into a hug. We did it, she corrected. But the fight isn't over, not yet. Grace nodded, her expression resolute. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn allowed herself a flicker of hope. The path ahead would be challenging. But tonight, they had taken the first step towards saving the inn and reclaiming their family's legacy. Evelyn's car idled silently as she sat in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The modest cafe ahead looked innocent enough, its warm yellow light spilling onto the empty street. But inside, Evelyn's world was unraveling. Through the fogged window, She could see her brother, Colton, sitting across from the investor, a sharp-suited man radiating authority and cold calculation. Her chest tightened as fragments of their conversation earlier that evening replayed in her mind, each word a blow to her fragile hope. For weeks, she had clung to the belief that Colton might come around, that her family could stand united against this threat. But the sight before her shattered that illusion. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she grabbed her phone, slid it into record mode, and quietly exited the car. The chill of the night air bit at her skin as she slipped into the shadows along the side of the cafe. The hum of voices filtered through an open window, muffled but clear enough to make out. "The contract will finalize by the end of next week," the investor said, his tone clipped and confident. "Once the sale goes through, you'll get your payout, but don't expect to stick around. This is business, Colton, not a family favor." Colton's shoulders stiffened. "We agreed I'd stay on to oversee operations. That was the deal." The investor chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "Deals change. You'll take your cut and walk away. You're not exactly what I'd call an asset to a long-term operation." Evelyn pressed herself against the wall, her phone shaking in her hand as she captured every word. The investor's dismissive tone was a knife to her resolve, carving deeper wounds with each passing moment. But it was Colton's faltering voice that twisted the blade. "This isn't what we agreed on," Colton said, his words trembling. "I thought this was about saving the inn." The investor leaned in, his voice low but venomous. "You thought wrong. This is about profit. The land's value far outweighs what your sentimental little inn can bring in. You can either fall in line or get left behind." Evelyn couldn't take another second. She stepped into the cafe, her heels clicking against the worn floorboards with deliberate force. The sound shattered their conversation, and both men's heads snapped toward her. Colton's face paled as recognition dawned. "Evelyn?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't bother," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "I heard everything." She raised her phone, the recording still running. "Your little partnership is over." The investor's gaze turned icy, his sharp features hardening. "This is a private meeting, Miss Anderson. Spare me," Evelyn cut him off, her glare unwavering. "You're not just threatening my family's inn, you're preying on my brother's insecurities to line your pockets, and now you've been caught." Colton's face twisted with conflicting emotions, anger, shame, and a flicker of fear. "You were spying on me?" he demanded, his voice rising. Evelyn turned to him, her expression raw with hurt. "You betrayed me, Colton. You betrayed our family, our legacy. For what? A payout? A chance to finally prove you're not the screw-up? Was it worth it?" The cafe fell into a heavy silence, the weight of her words pressing down on them all. Colton clenched his fists, his gaze dropping to the table. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I was tired of always being in your shadow. You swoop in with your big ideas and your perfect life, and suddenly, you're the hero. What about me? When do I get to matter?" Evelyn blinked, stunned by the vulnerability in his voice. Her anger wavered for a moment, replaced by a pang of sympathy. But it wasn't enough to dull the sting of his betrayal. "You do matter," she said softly, stepping closer. But not like this, not by tearing us apart." She slid into the booth across from him, placing her phone on the table. "This isn't just about me or you. It's about everything our family built. We can still save it, but we have to do it together." The investor scoffed, rising to his feet. "Touching," he drawled, his voice dripping with disdain. "But your sentimental nonsense won't stop this deal. You don't have the resources or the influence to fight me." Evelyn's gaze snapped to him, her resolve hardening. "Not yet, but now the town knows who you are, and I'll make sure everyone else does too." The investor's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake, Miss Anderson. This isn't over." "No," Evelyn replied, her voice steel. "It's just beginning." The investor sneered but said nothing as he stormed out of the cafe, the door slamming shut behind him. The tension lingered in his absence, a suffocating weight that Evelyn turned to face head-on. Colton exhaled shakily, his shoulders sagging. "I screwed up," he said, his voice barely audible. Evelyn nodded, her tone softer now. "Big time." She reached across the table, resting a hand on his arm. "But it's not too late to fix it. You just have to decide whose side you're on." For the first time, Colton looked at her with something other than defiance. There was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, fragile but real. Evelyn stood, pocketing her phone. "Think about it," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'll be at the inn." As she stepped into the cool night air, Evelyn allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The fight was far from over, but for the first time she saw a crack in Colton's armor. It was a start, a small but crucial step toward reclaiming their family's legacy. The Mountain Ridge Inn gleamed under the golden sunlight, its fresh coat of paint catching the warm glow of autumn. The newly landscaped garden brimmed with blooming marigolds and chrysanthemums, creating a welcoming path to the restored entrance. Guests bustled in and out, their laughter and chatter filling the air. For the first time in years, the inn exuded life and energy, just as Evelyn had envisioned. Standing by the grand window in the lounge, Evelyn watched as Grace expertly guided a group of guests toward the dining room. Pride swelled in her chest as she noticed her daughter's growing confidence. It had been a long, grueling road, but seeing Grace step into a role of responsibility reminded Evelyn of why she'd fought so hard to save the inn. Her thoughts drifted as her gaze settled on the old oak tree by the garden. A vivid memory of her grandfather flashed before her, his worn hands planting that very tree decades ago. "This place will outlive us, Evelyn," he'd said with a twinkle in his eye, patting the soil, "but only if we care for it like it's part of the family." Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes as she whispered, "I hope I made you proud, Grandpa." The soft creak of a door brought Evelyn back to the present. Colton stepped into the lounge, his shoulders slightly slouched but his face holding a rare look of sincerity. For months, they had worked side by side to rebuild the inn, their interactions civil yet restrained. But today, something in his expression told her it was time for a long overdue conversation. "Evelyn," Colton began, his voice hesitant but steady, "can we talk?" She nodded, gesturing for him to sit on the nearby sofa. The tension in the room was palpable, yet there was an undercurrent of relief, like they had both been waiting for this moment. "I've been a fool," Colton admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I was so caught up in proving myself that I lost sight of what really mattered. I put my pride above our family, above the inn, and I'm sorry." Evelyn's heart softened, though the wounds from their past conflicts still lingered. "You hurt me, Colton," she replied, her tone firm but not unkind. "But this inn, our family, it's bigger than our mistakes. If we're going to move forward, it has to be together." He nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm ready to make things right. I want to honor Grandpa and Grandma's legacy, the way they would have wanted." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their reconciliation settling between them. Evelyn finally reached over, placing a hand on Colton's. "Then let's do this. Together." The sound of applause and chatter from the courtyard interrupted their conversation. Evelyn and Colton stepped outside to find the community gathered under the oak tree, celebrating the inn's recent accolade. Recognition as one of Vermont's top destinations by a prestigious travel magazine. Tables adorned with local delicacies stretched across the garden, and a small stage had been set up for speeches. As the crowd quieted, Evelyn took the stage, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and gratitude. She looked out at the sea of familiar faces, friends, neighbors, even her parents standing arm in arm, and felt a profound sense of connection. "This inn has always been more than just a building," Evelyn began, her voice steady but emotional. "It's a testament to resilience, to family, to the power of community. There were times when I thought we might lose it, but standing here today, I'm reminded of what can happen when we come together." She paused, glancing at Grace and Colton, who stood at the front of the crowd. "My grandfather used to say that this place would outlive us if we treated it like family, and today we've proven him right." The audience erupted in cheers, and Evelyn felt a deep sense of peace as she stepped down from the stage. Colton joined her, his smile genuine. "Grandpa would have been proud," he said softly. Evelyn nodded, her gaze sweeping over the lively scene. "And this is just the beginning. I've been thinking about expanding, adding a new event space and hosting more community events. This inn isn't just for us, it's for everyone." Grace beamed. "Count me in, I've got ideas too." Evelyn laughed, pulling her daughter into a hug. The future felt bright, filled with possibilities and promise. For the first time in years, she felt not just hopeful, but whole. As Evelyn and her family looked toward a brighter future, the story of Mountain Ridge Inn reminds us of the timeless values that truly matter: resilience, the power of community, and the enduring strength of family bonds. This tale isn't just about saving a building. It's about rediscovering what unites us and learning to embrace forgiveness and second chances. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to lose sight of the people and places that ground us. Evelyn's journey teaches us that sometimes preserving what's most meaningful requires courage, humility, and a willingness to work together, even when the odds seem stacked against us. What do you think about Evelyn's fight to protect her family's legacy? Have you ever faced a challenge where the stakes felt just as personal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. If this video touched your heart or gave you something to think about, type 1" in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. And if you didn't find it compelling, tell me why. I value your feedback and would love to improve. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more inspiring stories like this one. Let's keep the conversation going and continue sharing stories that bring us closer together.